at this time as we go into God's Word. And we are in the middle of a series called Exhale. And the reason we think it's important to begin this year with this series is because after, again, an unusual year, which those words we've heard so many times, we've kind of been holding our breath a little bit with a feeling of anxiety of the unknown. But we need to kind of exhale a little bit. And we can do that, as we heard last week by Pastor Rob, by being still and knowing that God is in control. God has this, or as he said, God got this. And that was just a great message, and we thank him for that this morning. But you know what? You can tell a lot by a person's breathing. You really can. You can tell a lot by a person's breathing. If you've lived with someone long enough, this is so true. You could be sitting next to your spouse during a movie and know right away that they are falling asleep just by the rhythm of their breathing or the sound of their breathing. You can be sitting next to your spouse in church and tell if they are falling asleep. You can tell a lot by someone's breathing. You even know this is for your kids. I drive my kids to school, and some of them, and I can tell when my daughter has an exam or something that is causing her some anxiety. It's the long breathing that kind of vibrates a little bit. You know, it's like you're breathing out just to try to relieve yourself. And one of my daughters just got her license, so I'm the one breathing short breaths of anxiety right now. And I took her to one of her driving lessons, and you knew she was nervous. It was the long, nervous breaths. And last week I picked her up from the motor registration, and we didn't know if she had passed or failed. And she came in. She came in early. We saw her come in the vehicle, and she pulled over, and she had her mask on. I said, I'll tell by immediately when the mask comes off whether or not she passed. She pulled the mask off, and she gave that big Julia Roberts smile, and she passed, right? And you know, on not so comical side, if you've lost a loved one, I'm sure you have found yourself short of breath and to only eventually breathe out a long breath of loneliness. It's true, right? If you're going through sickness, you know that what it is to breathe out breaths of pain. But the Bible has answers on how to breathe easier in a season where our anxiety is high and the future is unfamiliar. Is it even possible to have a sense of calm when the path ahead is filled with the unknown? And the answer to that really is what will give us a sense of calm, isn't it? Because we all know that 2021 is in some ways much like 2020. You know that already many of the rhythms that you had last year you have now, like kids going to school, battling through sickness, busyness at work, you're a student, and all the scheduling. It may look a little different, but we know it chases us into another year. And as we engage in life again, we need to exhale. Because breathing deeply sends a message to the brain to calm down. It's actually scientifically proven that breathing out helps us to be calm. And so we need to breathe a sigh of relief knowing that the Bible can help us through this season. As we lean into the second part of this series, I want to focus on another portion of the Bible. Jesus is addressing this issue with his disciples in John 15. There's a sense of anxiety because what's happened already is Judas has betrayed Jesus and he has fled into the night to meet with the authorities. And there's this real sense of the uncertainty of the future because they know Jesus is leaving. It's the real breeding ground for short, anxious breaths. And here's a characteristic about Jesus that we must observe in John 15. Jesus doesn't respond to his impending crucifixion with panic or self-absorption. His attention is on the needs of those around him. They are anxious and fearful and confused, and what will happen to them when he is gone, and they're in this upper room with him. And they've seen Jesus perform healings, raise people from the dead, walk on water, and yet says nothing. He says nothing to them about how to prepare to do those things as he gets to leave. Jesus' final words to them are pivotal, and he's teaching us this principle to you and I at the heart of the scripture, and it's this: the pathway to breathing easier isn't about striving, it's about abiding. The text I'm about to read can be misunderstood if you read it with the motivation that you have to produce something in order to bear fruit in your life. It says, I am the vine, John 15:1, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so it will be even more fruitful. And our immediate response to this kind of language is, I have to do something in order to be fruitful, in order to be connected to God. So we frantically run into another year trying to convince ourselves out of problems that past patterns created. You cannot believe your way out of problems that your past patterns have created. And we come into the second part of this series. Your anxiety level is up because maybe, just maybe, you have walked into another year thinking it is going to be different, but there's a deep-rooted pattern that will take more than just convincing. The gardener would like to speak to you today. So often we want to blame the tree for the fruit that is not there. We want to blame God for the blessings that he didn't give. And our anxiety is high, and we're breathing deep breaths of anxiety because we have not dealt with certain patterns. But did you notice a similarity here? In the text, the same pain that the fruitless branch feels in the pruning is the same pain the fruitful branch is feeling. If you're fruitless, you're cut off. In order to be fruitful, you have to be cut back. It's the same feeling for the life that is growing and the life that is dying. Jesus makes this helpful connection in this passage between fruitfulness and faithfulness. And they are inseparable. We measure faith by seasons, don't we? But God measures faith by fruit and faithfulness. You may be in a season where you are not seeing any fruit in your life. Yet God is calling you to be faithful. We will never learn the lesson of abiding unless we learn to be faithful even when we don't see fruit. You hear what I'm saying? We are driven to be fruitful. We want to see results. If I do the time, I want to see the results. It's the reason why 2 weeks into 2021, you're becoming discouraged. But just maybe today, God is not calling you to be successful right now. He's calling you to be faithful. We have this idea of what success should look like. There are a lot of people that don't appear to be successful, but they are faithful. And they're fruitful because fruitfulness is not always indicated on the outside. As a matter of fact, faithfulness is an internal posture. Psalms 1:3 says this: the person who trusts the Lord, that person is like a tree planted by the streams of water, which yields its fruit in season. And that means that there are some seasons you won't seem fruitful. But if you are planted in the right soil, if you abide, there will always be something growing in your life. There will always be something maturing in your life. Even when you're in a season of pain, God can be doing something. It's your position. I want you to hear this. It is your position in Christ that makes all the difference, not your productivity. We think we bear fruit in doing, but we bear fruit by being. We do that. You're walking into another year trying to do more, but the pathway to breathing easier isn't about striving, it's about abiding. Now, I decided that I wanted to break a pattern in my life. And I started on a path to lose some weight, and I know you can barely recognize me this morning. And I want to become healthier. And you see, nighttime eating is my problem. Anybody got an amen there? That's right. I can go till supper time without eating much. I really can, the whole day almost. But when 9 p.m. comes, something takes over my body. It does. It's a pattern that I created over years. It got to the point that I was eating more than the amount of my daily suggested calories between 9 p.m. and 12 p.m. And I counted one night while trying to break this habit, I went to the fridge 20 times to get something to eat and close it. No, I can't do it. 20 times, no joke. Open and close. It is hard to break a pattern that you spent years perfecting, right? The key to breaking this pattern was introducing new patterns like exercise and balanced eating. And it's not easy because I want results without being faithful to the new patterns. Anybody with me on that? Right? We're looking for the quick fix, but it ain't. It's the changing of patterns. But here's the problem in our spiritual life. We want fruit without faithfulness. We do. And faith is formed not in doing, but in the pattern of abiding. And Jesus in John 15 is about to leave his disciples and go to a cross, and he's reminding them that if you don't introduce the rhythm of abiding, something happens, and when you are living in the rhythm of abiding, something happens. Both times. It says, he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more what? Fruitful. And a number of years ago, we visit our friends who grew grapes in their backyard. It can happen. The problem was we visited in the wrong season. Josh was just a kid and he expected to walk in and pick grapes from the vine, but what we saw was a troubled-looking vine that was cut down from last year's season. He couldn't understand why you would cut off vines. We could see it there in a heap. We didn't see fruit. All we saw was dead vines. But Jesus says the fruitful branches were cut off. But Jesus didn't say that the fruitful branches were cut off. Cut off implies that you have lost connection with the source. Cut off means set aside when you don't remain in his love. The verse says, remain in my love. And what he is saying is the love of God will never stop pursuing you. But you can live a life in such a way where you cut off the love of God that is flowing to you. And if you are not experiencing his love, it is not because God has stopped expressing it. It's because you may have moved out from underneath it. But notice in verse 6, it isn't the action. This is so profound, okay? It isn't the action of the gardener that results in the cutting off. It is the unwillingness of the vine to stay connected to the source that results in no fruit. He says, if you do not remain in my love, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers and then picked up and thrown into the fire. Living in God's love and abiding are directly connected. This is so true. What's our first reaction when a season of our life is full of pain and pruning? We say this, God doesn't love me and he's left me alone. We all struggle with that. It's then, if we're not careful, we question his love. But so the opposite is true. When we are abiding and God begins to cut back, when some pain comes, remaining in him helps us to see what God is doing. There is no worse feeling in life when life feels unfruitful. This is so true for anyone who's praying and praying for that thing and still no answer. There is nothing more fulfilling than bearing the fruit you are meant to bear because of the seed God planted in you. But there is nothing more frustrating. And I'm not talking about feeling unfruitful because you are not abiding or obedient. We have no right to be frustrated with the fruit that didn't come when we were living in disobedience. But what is frustrating? What's causing you short breaths of anxiety today is when you did sow seeds and you were planted and you're not seeing any fruit. There is nothing more discouraging than feeling unfruitful. I didn't say being unfruitful. Because the reality is the moment when we feel unfruitful, and more oftentimes when God is doing some pruning and cultivating your character for the greater gifts that he's going to give you. Has anyone ever experienced that? Where in a season of time when God is silent, but you know God is up to something. What helps us to breathe a little easier is this. It's the difference between being cut off and cut back. And you came to church feeling today, and maybe you're watching, feeling that you have been cut off, but you need to know today, like the grapevine that should have been bearing fruit. And what I explained to Joshua, it looked like that our friends neglected this vineyard. They had to cut them back in order for them to grow back. It is a season of pruning, preparing them for another season of fruitfulness. And God isn't cutting you off, He's cutting you back. You may not be bearing fruit in this season, but you can still be faithful. You may not be living out your purpose or your passion right now, but you can still be faithful. And they are connected. Faith and fruit are connected. And if we forget that, we will misinterpret what God is doing in this season. And God is the great gardener, and He knows when to prune. And He is directing, He is superintending the process in your life right now. And there's a word stuck in the middle of John 15 that we do not like when we are abiding. We don't like it because we have this internal pull for our lives to be more than what it is. And I want it to be more than, I want it to be more this year than it was last year. And the internal pull is to be fruitful. So when we hear this word while, it doesn't sit well. He says it cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes. We don't like this word because it's indefinite, especially when it refers to a period of time. It's open-ended. You have been on the end of someone responding to you with maybe in a little while, right? You have been, if you've ever been a kid when you're excited about something and only to be met with a parent saying, maybe in a little while. To a child, that's eternity. That's like never. There's nothing that causes shallow breathing than while. It's hard to commit to consistency when you have no frame of reference because we are wired to think everything has a deadline, and when it doesn't, we feel we are missing our season of bearing fruit. It's easy to get distracted when we are not in a season of bearing fruit. It's easy to lose focus going into another year if you have been waiting on God for something and it's taking a while. And in Mark 14, there's a story of a woman who didn't get distracted. There's a lesson here for us. Jesus is invited to Simon's house, and he just performed one of the most amazing healings when he raised Lazarus from the dead. And it says, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, and she broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. And when those watching, including Judas, saw her do this, they were outraged to such of a waste of resources. But Mary was teaching something about abiding. And in John it says, she took her hair down and washed Jesus' feet with her hair. Women in that culture would never take their hair down. It was unacceptable. And yet she demonstrates the proper way to abide in Him. She didn't just wake up that morning and decide to pour this expensive perfume on Jesus. Why does she give so extravagantly as she sits at His feet? And John tells us in detail. It's right there in verse 1. It says of chapter 12, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, then Mary. This is the same Mary who saw Lazarus, her brother, come to life. She saw death turn to life. She saw the power of God when there is faith. She saw one word from Jesus changing a situation. She is pouring out her sacrificial offering because she has had an experience with God. She has seen the hand of God at work in her life. And she is telling us from her life, offering God your sacrificial worship is always at the heart of abiding. It's in any season, whether pruning or being fruitful, abiding in Him out of the gratefulness of our heart for what God has done. We extravagantly give our worship. When I see the hand of God at work, I pour out my worship. When I am in a season when it feels like a while could take a long while and I am not seeing fruit, I'm going to abide at the feet of Jesus and I'm going to worship Him. There was something about Mary For some reason, she knew this was a pivotal moment. As I come to a conclusion, she heard from God. She filled the room with an aroma. She knew this was her moment, and she sat at his feet. Others were concerned about such a waste. She made a decision to make a sacrifice. She wouldn't be distracted by what others thought. Others had their idea of what worship she should do or what kind of act of worship she should do. But that's what happens when we are not in the posture of abiding. Every time we see Mary, she's abiding at Jesus' feet. When Jesus didn't show up in time to heal Lazarus and he died, she ran to Jesus and fell at his feet in anguish, in her pain. In the pruning of her life, in the painful moments of her life, she was at his feet. Even though she was desperate, she was at his feet. She sits at his feet again to pour out a costly act of worship and washes his feet with her hair. And the first time we see her in Luke 10, she is in the same position. Jesus visits with Mary and Martha. Martha is distracted, right? But Mary is sitting. The idea of sitting and abiding at the feet of someone is to learn from them, to acknowledge their authority, to submit to their teaching. And in her pain, in her worship, she didn't get distracted. The moment Mary would have stood up, she would have been susceptible to the accusations of the people around her. And I wonder today that you may be going into another year with a sense of a heavy anxiety because you have forgotten the pathway to breathing easier isn't about striving, it's about abiding. And Jesus is teaching us in this imagery of the gardener and the branches. He says, abide in this text 11 times. Not fruit, abide. He's telling us what it means to sit at the feet of Jesus, to learn from him, to acknowledge his authority, to submit to his teaching. Let me help you breathe a little easier. We are not told to produce fruit. We are told to abide. The motivation to grow is to know God more by abiding in him, which produces the right fruit. We try to reverse the roles. We try to drum up some kind of fruit. We try to drum up some type of success without staying connected and abiding to the vine. But God is telling us, and the story is telling us in John 15 this morning, it is when we abide in him and know him and acknowledge him and be strengthened by him, that's when we get to know the God of our life and we produce better fruit. And so, abiding means 4 things for going into a new year that may be causing some short breaths of anxiety in your life. Our abiding will help us to slow down so that you can breathe a little easier. The first is this: submit. Submitting is the first step to abiding. It means I submit to the strength and source that gives life to the branch. Your life is the product of how well-grounded you are in Jesus. You cannot experience the strength of the vine if you're not connected. So submit. Listen. Like Mary, as I end this morning, I'm not distracted by what Martha is doing. I'm not distracted by what others think of my worship. I'm connected to the source, and I'm listening to his voice. What is God saying to me in this season of pruning? So we submit. We listen. We obey. It is clear in this book, John 15, that obedience and love for him are connected. Our obedience is how we demonstrate our love for God. If I love him, I obey his commands. So I submit, I listen, I obey, and I worship. Worshiping takes the focus off the distractions around us and places it on the very one who sustains us in the fruitful seasons and the pruning seasons. And so abiding in 2021 means just breathe out for a moment. Be still and know that I am God. God's got this. Abide in me. You are like a branch connected to the vine. And take away these practical things as you build into the pattern of a new year, the rhythm of abiding. I want you to hear this. First, I have to stop trying to figure out what God is doing and just abiding Him. I know. You control freaks in the room. You who want to know A, B, C, D, that's going to be difficult. But the strength of a new year for you is not doing, it's abiding. Secondly, my strength for tomorrow is found in my ability to sit at His feet in this season, in this moment, right now. And lastly, more often than not, when God is silent in my life, He is pruning and preparing me for fruitfulness down the road. What's God saying to you? Is God silent? Why don't you stand all over this room today? When God is silent in my life, He is pruning and preparing me for fruitfulness down the road. If God is silent in this moment in your life, and you're wondering where He is today, and you're seeking Him for something or someone, and He's silent, more often than not, when He is silent, He's pruning, He's cultivating, and He's preparing for fruitfulness down the road. Just abide. Just submit. Just listen. Just obey. Just worship. Can't you see Mary? With all the distractions around her, all the things around her, because of her faith in God, because of her experience with God, she watched Jesus heal her brother. And she's in that moment, I'm just going to sacrificially worship God, worship Jesus. I'm going to sit at His feet and ignore the things around me, all the things that can cause a distraction in my life, and I'm just going to sacrificially worship. I'm even going to break religious rules and pull my hair down and wash His feet because of what He's done in my life. So God is speaking to you today. Abide. Just slow down. Carve out that moment in your day where you submit, you listen, you obey, and you worship Him. Pastor Justin, lead us.